Hello everyone and welcome to today's presentation. This presentation is on 6 survey papers as a mini survey. The list of all the 6 survey papers are on this slide. The first survey paper that we are going to discuss is Practical Recommendation for Stronger, More Usable Password Combining Minimum Strength, Minimum Length and Block List Requirement. For ease of understanding, I am going to refer this paper as Strong Password. The second paper that we are going to discuss is Driving Two-Factor Authentication Adoption at Scale, Optimizing Two-Factor Authentication Notification Design Patterns. And again, for easier understanding, I will be referring this paper as Optimizing Two-Factor Authentication. The third paper in this segment is on the insecurity of SMS one-time password messages against local attackers in modern mobile devices. This paper will be referred to as Insecurity of OTP. The fourth paper here is Virtual Classroom and Real Harms, Remote Learning at US Universities. Fifth paper is Mitigation of Attacks on Email End-to-End Encryption. And the last paper in this survey list is Too Good to Be Safe, Tricking Lane Detection in Autonomous Driving and with Crafted Perturbations. The first paper for discussion is Stronger Password Requirement. The motivation for this paper is that many researchers have found the requirement of stronger password, but they do not provide a guidance on how to combine these requirements. The author tries to achieve stronger password using combination of length, character class, block list, and password meter. This paper is based on studies on users using 2 experiments. Using retrospective analysis and leaked data, these experiment limitations were gathered. Some of the factors in the experiment were composition requirement defines that a minimum number of 8 character length is required. Next is the blocking list requirement, which would block any password if it is found on the prohibited list. And finally, minimum strength requires the number of attempts a wrong password is allowed in terms of log 10 guess spaces. Both the experiments were tested for different number of attempts. Experiment 1 was conducted to answer 4 research questions. Impact of block list versus policy, block list requirement for 1C8 in terms of security and usability, minimum password length required, comparing block list and minimum strength. Experiment 2 research questions are minimum length and strength affect usability and security, block list requirement, impact password strength. And now let's move on to the limitations of the paper. Study subjects might not have set the same password as they do in real life. Paper results rely on password created using special password meter giving out suggestions on how to improve the password. Finally, the conclusion that the author said was that the need for policies should include minimum length and minimum strength. Experiment 1 explains that block lists do not improve password strength if it uses a strict algorithm. But when combined with policy of minimum strength, it helps a lot. Experiment 2 shows that NN8 and NN10 give similar results, such as the block list policies. The second paper for discussion is Optimizing Two-Factor Authentication, and the motivation for this paper is that two-factor authentication helps protect against account security threats such as phishing and password reuse attacks. Two-factor authentication creates significant friction that hinders attackers, and no prior work has specifically studied the impact of prompts on improving two-factor authentication adoption in wild and at this scale. In order to complete this paper, there were 2 research questions that the author had described. The first research question is, does messaging tailor to address users' motivation, mental model, and concerns about two-factor authentication improve two-factor authentication's adoption? Research question 2 is, does applying UX design pattern from other domains in enrollment prompt encourage the adoption of two-factor authentication? Next, the author used a 9 strategy in order to show the different UX designs So in order to address research question 1, author used a 3x3 experimental design to craft a total of 9 prompts encouraging users to enable two-factor authentication. Each prompt consists of heading message with 3 variants, body text with 3 variants, and a blue turn on button that a user would click to initiate a two-factor authentication enrollment process. Each headline framed the benefits of two-factor authentication through 3 different responsibility lenses. Headlines were tested with the user response, company responsibility, and control messages. Body of the prompts were divided into controlled and experimental. And to address research question 2, personalizations had positive effect on adoption of multi-factor authentication. Adding a deferral option led to a negative impact. Some of the limitations of this paper are that the experiments were limited to Facebook app only, and they did not include enterprises and were done only on individuals. It was also geographical, very centric to just US and no other country. The focus on SMS-based two-factor authentication and did not explicitly examine two-factor adoption for more elaborate mechanisms. Finally, the results of this experiments were that the headline that framed two-factor authentication as users' responsibility led to an increase in adoption. Effectiveness were due to 2 reasons. First, it underscores individual responsibilities as a factor that protection motivation theory and prior digital security works conducted in the context of behavioral intent has suggested is an important prerequisite to users taking protective digital security action. And the second one is that it effectively communicates risk by bringing up hackers. Next paper for discussion is the insecurity of OTP. Typically, OTP authentication consists of 5 steps. That is, user sends phone number to app's backend server creates the OTP and sends the phone number using SMS. App gets the OTP code from SMS and sends it back to the app server through a network connection. Server verifies this code and verifies the user. Finally, after these steps, a token is sent to the user's device for further communication. Different methods were used by the attacker to obtain user's OTP. User interaction involves user to copy and paste SMS code into the app by a method which is used either by tap, access, or paste the code received on the user's mobile phone. Requesting SMS permission involves apps asking permission to read and receive SMS, which are termed as dangerous, as apps are given permission to read any SMS in the inbox and also read all new incoming SMSs too. Automated access using SMS APIs include APIs with identifiable strings using cryptographical signatures. Automated method use 3 APIs, that is SMS retriever, SMS token, and SMS token plus. The mitigation methods mentioned in the paper are a set of ideal scenarios that can be implemented in real world. For this, a modified API is created to carry SMS messages. And here are the steps. SMS OTP messages using this API must start with a precious prefix hash. Messages starting with a specific prefix under no circumstances are delivered to the SMS inbox. Messages starting with a specific prefix can be visualized by a user using a dedicated system app. Messages are delivered to the app whose hash code is contained in the message itself. The hash code is computed as in the current SMS retrieved API, but its length is truncated to 38 base 64 characters instead of 11. Next, we will discuss the paper Virtual Classroom and Real Harm Remote Learning at US University. The motivation for this paper is the rapid change in learning and teaching pattern due to COVID-19 led to schooling processes move online. Many universities adapted remote education platforms, but the security and privacy issue of such platforms are unknown. Actors in the educational technology system are both principles to defend and possible dangers to mitigate. In acknowledgement of the range of roles that members in the class may play, A meaningful threat model should indicate the level of trust to assign to each actor. In order to create a threat model, author created experiments with internal, student, administrator, and instructor, and external, third-party, and adversaries actors. Author believed that the present rules do not provide enough control over platform activity to ensure compliance with higher education privacy standards, and gives a brief on legal framework of US on student privacy. FREPA needs institutions to keep students' record which can be available on request only after getting the consent to release the information, but these rules apply to institutes that are government funded. FREPA do not govern how platforms use data, instead focusing on schools and university platform used in higher education have a lot of discretion with how they use and abuse education data after it reaches their possession. Finally, to conclude, internal policies at universities can help bridge the gap between the local needs and community expectation, existing laws and practice. The author suggested that ID administrator provide explicit guidelines for how software should adhere to education norms, and that developers provide products that allow them to tailor software for their environment. Some recommendations from the author is to identify users' expectation, negotiate specific practice, and to penalize non-compliance in popular platform does not mean guaranteed security. Next, we are going to discuss the server paper mitigation of attack on email end-to-end encryption. Research question author wanted to address in this paper is the possibility to define countermeasures against all three attack classes, eFail-MG, eFail-DE, and reply based on a single cryptographical mechanism. Next question is the possibility to deploy a countermeasure by fixating the MIME and SMTP context. The last research question was possibility to define sender-enforced countermeasures against eFail-DE and reply attacks similar to the AEAD mechanism standardized against eFail-MG. Attack known as eFail-MG takes use of malleability of block cipher encryption technique used in email standards. Exploiting regular MIME processing, eFail-DE technique attacks are launched. Reply assaults are a type of email attack that takes advantage of a common email behavior. An attacker can transform a single block of unknown plain text into many chosen plain text block whenever malleable encryption mode is used, like CBC mode in SMEME and CFB mode in OpenPGP. Email context is a combination of MIME context and SMTP context. Any change in the email context of the original ciphertext hints to an attack. This paper next goes on to define decryption context implemented to mitigate eFail malleability gadget attack. According to the feature of AEAD scheme, if the adversary updated the email and MIME element M in such a way that the new description context DC differs from DC than AEAD. Mitigation against direct booking exfiltration attack in the tested email clients is blocking external resources such as remote images in decrypting emails, disabling HTML for encrypted emails or converting it to a plain text, isolating the content between meme parts by adding quotes, closing tags or iframes, displaying a warning to the user before opening an email, refusing to decrypt partially encrypted emails at all. The last paper for discussion is lane detection in autonomous driving and crafted perturbation. The motivation for this paper is to reveal that oversensitivity of the targeted module can be exploited to launch attacks on a vehicle. Author uses two approaches. The first is to decide the optimal perturbation on the camera, and the second is map them to the road markings in the physical world. Next, the results were based on 6 research questions. These are efficiency of algorithm for best perturbation, different parameters affected quality of perturbation, changing camera image affecting the performance, common characteristics of best perturbation, effectiveness of the attack in real world, and can a vehicle be misguided in the real world. So the limitation for this paper was to the understanding of the model's complete working code was not possible. Additionally, few experiments were done on real vehicle. There are chances that drivers can keep a check on what changes are happening during an autopilot, but chances are very low. But even if the drivers found the response time for the reaction is low. Conclusion: lane detection algorithm is so sensitive that some unobstructive stickers on the road surface will be regarded as a valid lane, and thus vehicles can be misled. That's all in today's presentation. Thank you.